Okay, crew. So I'm going to walk you through how to complete radical acceptance so that you have an example of how to do your homework. So the homework today is going to be DT 36, where you're going to practice radical acceptance step by step. So one thing to note is that I'm going to walk you through an example from my life that was more of a low stakes situation. And I'm doing this because sometimes, well, a lot of the times, radical acceptance can be really hard. And I don't want to start out with the biggest of all things to be accepted ever, because it can take some build up to get some mastery of this. So I'm on purpose starting with a low stakes situation so that you have an idea of possible lower stakes situations where you could practice this skill for your homework this week. So we're going to get into it, and I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can see how we would complete this worksheet in an example situation for me. So let's watch me be techie here. Okay, so I'm going to go in and out of sharing this so that we can get this done step by step. So the first part of DT 36 is we're going to define what the problem or the situation is that we're having trouble accepting. So now that we know that that's where we're going, let me explain the situation. So the situation was prior to my bathroom remodel project, I was working on repainting all the walls in my house. And one particular place where I was working on was in the staircase, the walls on the staircase. They were painted a light yellow, but underneath the yellow, it looked like there was wallpaper, and the wallpaper was peeling off. So every foot or every 2 feet, there was a really tall horizontal line that went from the bottom of the stairs to the total top, which is to the second story of the house. There were these really long lines every foot to 2 feet. So I learned that if I wanted a flat wall, I wanted to get rid of the indentation or the peeling of the wallpaper, I was going to have to scrape off all the paint off the walls. And it was very large, there was a very large surface area. So I'm going to reshare the screen. That's what we're going to write down for our problem. Okay, so what is the problem? I have to scrape off all the paint in my stairway. And this is going to take a long time. Okay, so now we have the problem laid out super succinctly. Now, step 2, we're going to describe the part of the situation that's unacceptable, or the part of ourselves that isn't accepting. So the thing here is in this situation, the part that was part of myself that was not accepting was that I had a lot of judgments about how walls should be prepped and how they shouldn't be prepped. So I had the judgment, or the should, that if I was going to paint a wall that had wallpaper on it, I would have never just painted over the wallpaper. I would have taken the wallpaper off and then done all the sanding and all the wall prep, and then I would have painted it. But someone didn't do that, so now I have to do a lot of the work that I felt should have been done before. So I was pretty angry about that, and I'm going to explain a little bit more in the next step. So the part of ourself that's not accepting, the part of the situation that's not acceptable, is I would have never taken a shortcut of painting over the wallpaper. Okay. So now we know the part that was unacceptable. Okay. So now, going to the painful facts of the situation in a short, non-judgmental statement. Before we talk about that, I just want to really emphasize that we need to aim for a non-judgmental statement here. So Um, Describing the painful facts. One of the painful facts in a non-judgmental way is that I was going to have to spend many days scraping off this paint. And I knew that I was going to have to spend many days because I started working with like a pretty small section. I don't know, like literally maybe this big. And it took me like an hour to scrape off that paint. And I had like hundreds more of those sizes of sections to do. So in a non-judgmental way, that's how I would describe it, that it's going to take me days to scrape off all this paint. Now I'm going to write this down, and then I'm going to tell you like a word to the wise. Okay, so I'm going to have to spend days scraping off this paint. So a sneaky way that non-acceptance or willfulness can come in here is by adding some judgments or some emotions into the painful facts. And it's understandable why this would happen because we obviously have emotions about this thing because oftentimes we don't have to work really hard to accept the things we like. It's pretty easy for us to accept those things, but we oftentimes have to work hard to accept the things that we don't like because that's not what we want. So it's a lot harder to accept that stuff. So sometimes emotions can sneak their way in here, and those can sometimes block your path to acceptance. So if we're looking at my example of me needing to scrape paint off the walls and it's going to take me days, how we have it written on the sheet is totally non-judgmental. But what I was feeling in that moment before I had turned my mind toward acceptance, I was saying, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to spend days doing this. I don't want to spend days ripping this or scraping this paint off the walls. This is ridiculous. Why should I have to do this? Those were the thoughts that were in my head and that were coming out of my mouth. And it took me a minute to realize, oh my gosh, this is not helpful for me right now. So I literally had to turn my mind toward acceptance, and I had to pause those thoughts. I had to pause those emotions, and I had to really focus in on non-judgmentally describing what was going to happen, because I needed to reduce that emotion or to take it out of what I was trying to accept before I was going to be able to accept it. So I went from, oh my God, I'm going to have to spend so long doing this, to the non-judgmental of I'm going to have to spend days scraping this paint off the wall. So I hope you see the difference there. Okay, so now we're going to go to the next step. And I'm going to share this again. Okay, so the next step is where we're going to write down what are some of the causes or events that led up to this reality. So every reality is going to have causes. And here, again, we're going to describe non-judgmentally what those causes could be that led up to the current reality, because there's always going to be something. So in my case, I'm going to write down at one point, the walls were wallpapered. At another point, the wallpaper was painted over. Another part of this reality is that the house is about 60 years old and has had multiple owners. And some of those owners could have had different opinions on how to prep walls. So I'm going to add that, and then I think we're solid on naming some of the causes or events. Okay, and again, I just want to point out here, you want to keep your eye out for any judgments or emotions slipping their way in here. So I'm going to highlight this different opinions. We already decided or talked through in step 2, this is not the way I would have done this. So to me, my judgmental mind is going towards this is the wrong way. These other people had the wrong opinion about how to prep walls. We don't want to have that language here. We're just going with the non-judgmental. So we're going to label that they had different opinions while removing whose opinion was right or wrong or better or worse. Okay. So now the next part of this skill is now where we're actually doing the practice of accepting the reality. So you can do this, a lot of ways, but a very important part of this to remember is that to do radical acceptance, it's radical. So that means you're accepting with your mind, your body, your spirit. So one thing that I personally like to do, and it's one thing I did as I was working on the staircase, once I realized I needed to turn my mind towards acceptance, prior to turning my mind, had a lot of tension in my body, and I had like a little scraper in my hand, and I was like scraping really vigorously, and there was a lot of tension and a lot of energy happening in my body. If I tried to do an acceptance exercise while I'm like scraping the daylight out of this stairwell, that's not going to set me up for acceptance. So to do acceptance in this instance, I dropped my little scraper. I sat down, I had a relaxed body posture. I did willing hands, which is laying your hands on your lap with like an open palm. And I did half smile. So half smile, you're going to watch another video about it. The spoiler alert is you're going to have a teeny tiny smile, just upturn the corners of your mouth. It might not even be visible to anyone else, but it's sending messages to your brain. I sat down, I did willing hands, I did half smile, and I said to myself, this is how the situation is. This is how the wall is. This is exactly as it should be. And this is what I'm working with. And I said that repeatedly over and over for about probably 5 minutes. And that helped me move forward, because before I was not being as effective with getting the wall scraped because I was so angry and frustrated that I was talking about my frustrations and venting about them and just kind of putting up my hands and being like, why is this the case? And the more time I spent saying to myself, why is this the case? The less time I was having to actually be making progress towards the wall. So by me doing my acceptance exercise, I was able to come more to terms with what the wall is, and I was able to change it more quickly than I would have been had I not turned my mind to acceptance, because I would have gotten sucked into that Death Star of the why me, why is this how it is, all of those types of things. So for your homework, a very important step that I want you to make sure you do is the last part, where you're rating your acceptance of the situation before and after the practice on a 0 to 5 scale. So 0 means I have no acceptance over this. And 5 is I do accept this thing. I don't like this thing. Acceptance doesn't have anything to do with our emotional response to it. So I didn't like my staircase. I had a lot of emotions about it. And by doing this practice, I was able to bump my acceptance up from about a 0 to, I would say, a pretty solid 4. So in your homework, I also want you to gauge the level of acceptance both before and after your practice. Okay, so to review, you're going to do DT 36 as your homework. And there might be another video where we talk about turning the mind, and you might have another homework assignment there. So keep your eye out for that.